Hi, this is Fred Green of Golf Smarter with the penultimate episode of our annual Spring into Golf season with the late Tony Manzoni. This is the continuation of our conversation that started last week with Tony discussing taking your game to the next level one club at a time from June of 2017. Tony's book, The Lost Fundamental, is available on Amazon, and his DVD, which we converted to a private online link, is also available when you write to me. For the most comprehensive information ever collected on Tony, please go to golfsmarter.com/Tony. And while you're there, check out how you can make a tax-deductible donation to the Tony Manzoni Memorial Golf Smarter Fund we created in his honor to benefit the first tee of Coachella Valley where Tony lived and taught for decades. If you'd like access to that video, please write to me directly, golfsmarterpodcast@gmail.com, or click on the Hey Fred button when you visit golfsmarter.com. Oh, there's more. This is part 2 of taking your game to the next level one club at a time with Tony Manzoni.
This is Golf Smarter, sharing stories, tips, and insights from great golf minds to help you lower your score and raise your golf IQ. Here's your host, Fred Green.
Welcome back to the Golf Smarter podcast, Tony.
Great to be back.
It's good to have you again. Thank you for, even though it's been a week since we've recorded our last one, usually when we do two-part episodes, we'll record one right after the other, but you had to go. So it's great that we can just go ahead and pick this up. Before we started recording a moment ago, we were talking about our excitement that the NBA Finals is beginning tonight. Now, I know when people listen to this, it's going to be old news, so I don't want to talk about the teams and their chances and what's going to happen. But, you know, there's something about the Warriors that is so interesting, that there are two players, Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, who are all-stars, and Steph's a superstar, but they both grew up in an NBA arena, right? Both of their fathers played in the NBA.
Right.
And then you think about players like Ken Griffey Jr., who grew up in a major league dugout because his dad played in the majors. And there's, other baseball players as well. What kind of impact, or do you know of players on the PGA Tour whose fathers were also players on the PGA Tour, and what kind of impact did it have on them in their play?
Well, in some cases, if the dads were great, let's say like Nicholas, it's very difficult for the sons to they go in there with an anchor because they've got to beat a record that's already been established. So that's the downside. The upside to it a lot of times is that because their dads were involved in a sport, whether it's baseball or whatever, they have a better comfort zone there, and they have a better understanding of what's going to happen because they've been around it, all their youth. So, it's kind of a two-pronged thing there. One is a little bit tough on you. The other one makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah, I could see how that, but if in fact you do pursue the same line that your dad did, it's like a lot of kids I can see just going, yeah, I want nothing to do with that because there's, I can't match up to him and I don't care.
Well, it's true. I mean, I was lucky enough to know Frank Sinatra a bit, and his son was a tremendous singer, but how are you going to stand up to Frank?
Yeah. It always seemed like Frank Jr. was a junior. He always just seemed like a bad copy of Frank trying to do Frank. He never seemed like, at least I never knew him, and just what I saw of him on television, that he was just trying to do Frank, and it just wasn't working.
Well, the truth be known, his speaking voice was exactly like Frank. So wow. His singing voice was going to be similar. He didn't have the pizzazz and the aura that Frank presented.
Sure. And
he didn't really have the chops that Frank had either. But he sounded like his dad. I remember when I was involved in the celebrity event that Barbara Sinatra put on for abused children. And one year, Frank Jr. did the show. This was after his dad had passed. And it was eerie. I mean, you would think it was Frank Sinatra on stage until you saw him. And then the way he handled him. So he had a very unique the ways about him when he sang. He did some really cool things. But his dad had, when Frank got on the stage, I don't care who was up there previous, he just owned the thing. Mm-hmm. He just had that it thing. That's it. Plus, he could sing his butt off.
And then talking about Wayward Sons, I have to do it. Any comments about Tiger?
I don't know the details. I do understand that you should be, you can't mix prescription drugs.
Right.
But a bigger question is, you're worth $750 million. What are you driving from Northern Cal to Southern Cal by yourself? Number one, and why not have a driver?
Why wasn't he in Florida?
Or he was going. I mean, it was a long drive. He was going to Florida or someplace.
Yeah, and he said he was going home, and he was going in the opposite direction.
Yeah, and when you look at the videos that they're showing, it's very incriminating. But I know of people that have had really bad reactions to drugs that are mixed. So I think the jury is still out, but a lot of people like to make a big deal out of it and make him look like a bad guy. He's got a lot of people that don't like him.
Sure.
And that kind of comes with the territory of being famous.
But I think there's also a lot of people who are going, oh, that's so sad. Oh.
Sure, I think there's a lot of people feel bad. It's, with Tiger, at one time he could have run for president.
Yeah.
And then after...
he came onto the scene. He kind of exploded onto the global stage at the same time as Barack Obama, right? I mean, a little bit earlier, but at 2008, he was at his pinnacle, and here comes Barack Obama. And anywhere in the world, it was kind of a debate on who was the most recognizable person in the world at that moment. Was it Tiger or was it Barack Obama?
Yeah, I think I would have voted for Tiger, to be honest with you. He was, he was bigger than life there for a while, and unfortunately, because of his escapades, he lost favor with everyone.
Yeah.
For a bit of time, and then little by little, people start creeping back into his camp, including sponsors. But there for a while, he was very disliked because he had this perfect marriage, kids, the whole thing, and then he dumps it for doing stupid things.
Yeah. Yeah. My greatest fear in all of this, that, with all the surgeries that he's had, and he's had multiple back surgeries. And if you've been following the Warriors, you know about Steve Kerr, and he's now regrets the surgeries that he had. He says you should never do back surgery. And Tiger's now had 4. My greatest fear is that he's addicted to pain meds.
That's a very good possibility. Yeah, very good possibility.
Sure.
Like you said, he's had so many operations. And I go back to, I met Tiger a long time ago at a tournament, a celebrity tournament. He just happened to be there because there's a lot of celebrities there.
Was he a pro at this point? Was he still a pro? Was he already a pro at this point, or was he still before that?
No, it was before that. And the first thing I noticed that he was very small boned for a guy that hit it so far. He was out of college, and he could bench press 300 pounds when he weighed 150. So he was a real strong guy, and he could run really fast too. But I noticed that he had, his hands are medium sized, but his wrists were very small. And so his tendons and everything were built for that kind of a frame. And then he started doing all the weight training and heavyweight training and got very big, and it's still big, really. And I think that you can put on a lot of muscle, but your structure is built for a certain body type. And I think that's where a lot of his injuries came from. It's just that he got so heavy muscled, and I don't think his tendons could hold up, his knees and so forth, the back, everything kind of fell apart. Because I did a tournament years ago called Kids for Kids, and I had Justin Leonard and Tiger. Tiger just hit the drive on one of the holes with like a pro-am to raise money for children that couldn't afford to play golf and so forth. And I remember I was fairly long hitter at that time, and I got up on the hole where it was a long drive contest, and I really cracked one. I was thinking, man, nobody's catching that one. And I got out there, and I saw this little flag about 40 yards ahead of my ball. He says, well, what the heck is that? He says, oh, that's where that 16-year-old kid hit it. And I mean, Tiger must weigh, he looked like he weighed about 50 pounds when he was there, just skinnier than heck. But boy, he could just move the ball. And I think he hit it farther as an amateur than he did as a pro.
Really?
And he was skinny. He was not, big muscled people don't hit it long. Davis Love is a perfect example of a long, lean guy that hit it long, even in his later years. So I think he's mistaken. I'm afraid that Rory McIlroy's done the same thing. He got into really heavy weight training. Way back when there was a guy by the name of Frank Stranahan, who was the first bodybuilder golfer, and I just don't think that the two match. I don't think they go together.
Interesting. And then like Jose Canseco was like the first big weightlifter for baseball, and then the accusation of steroids, and then everybody else. And then he came out and said, and what's so interesting is he came out and said he was going to do this book that everybody's doing steroids, and everyone was like, chastised him and berated him and pretty much blackballed him from the world of baseball. And now that many years later, he was right. All along, he was the one that was right.
You can't blame athletes for trying to get an edge when everybody else is doing the same thing.
Absolutely.
And no one's ever been definitive about steroids and things like that, what they can and cannot do. And if you don't abuse them, doctors prescribe them, for God's sake. So, but the problem is that when you get into weight training and you get into, okay, my arms are this big, I want to get them bigger, and I want to do this, you're in that arena where that stuff is bandied about, and that's when you're it's. I think it's like something that is like a drug almost. You want to get bigger, you want to get stronger. You get in the gym, you're bench pressing so much, you want to press more. And that stuff is available, and it kind of calls out to you, and that's when the mistakes start happening. You start injecting stuff and doing more of it than you should, and then you pay the piper. Yeah. That's why you see so many football players dying so early. I really attribute it to a lot of that kind of stuff.
The steroids and the pain medication.
Sure. Yeah. When you OD on that stuff, or when you do it too much in your system, it eventually catches up with you.
Let's get back to what our conversation started to be last week. I wanted to continue this week because you gave so much really valuable information. And what we're talking about is taking your game to the next level, one club at a time. And we're dissecting each of the clubs in our bag to see what we can do to improve our game and improve our ball striking and lower our scores by focusing on practicing with each club and what we can do. Last week, we talked about the putter, the 8-iron, chipping with an 8-iron, and the lob wedge, and the sand wedge, and then, how a ball releases when you're chipping and how much it releases. So if you missed that, you got to go back to hear that. But let's talk now. Let's start again here. Let's start at the sand wedge. We really didn't cover much of it. Tell me what I need to do better with my sand wedge that I'm not doing that's going to get the ball closer to the hole.
Well, the sand wedge is a marvelous club. Gene Sarazen was the one that invented the thing, and it's been primarily used for bunker shots and shots in and around the green and hitting flop shots. But then with the advent of higher lofted clubs being made with lob wedge and so forth, in my estimation, and this is just my opinion, and maybe I'm just a little old school because I am old. I like to hit all kinds of shots with the sand wedge. I don't even carry I put a 60-degree in, and it befuddled me because I couldn't get the distance control that I wanted. I expected more distance, and I came up short with a lot of shots. So I've gone back to the sand wedge. I've taken a little bounce off of it so I can use it in the fairways, and I can open it up and hit that lob shot. And really that's what you should do. When I was with Callaway and I got to know T.T. Rodriguez a little bit and listen to him, he had about 20 shots with the wedge. He could just do anything with it. And then in subsequent talks with Lee Trevino, he said I could do brain surgery with my wedge. That is if you want to play golf and shoot low numbers, you've got to be a wizard with those short clubs, especially the sand wedge and pitching wedge and the shots around the green. But the sand wedge is a fantastic club, but you must make sure that you have the correct bounce for what you're trying to get done. I love the Cleveland wedges. I love the Titleist Vokey wedges. They seem to be whoever is doing the design seems to be a good player and understands what they should be like, especially in the bounce area.
Can you? It's been discussed before, but there's still it's confusing. What do you mean by bounce?
Well, bounce. There's the flange on the golf club. Well, if you take a club and turn it over, you'll see that a high bounce club, the flange kind of sticks out a little bit. It's higher.
I'm sorry, flange is the part that touches the ground?
Yes.
Okay.
So the idea of the flange is that it penetrates the sand a little bit. It goes into the sand a little bit, and that's what puts sand on the face of the club, and then you hit the ball, and the ball comes out soft. So way back when, I've got an old wizard wedge by Johnny Revolta that's like an anvil, very heavy, big flange on it. But it was primarily for the sand. But you also want a sand wedge that you can use off the turf. And if you have too much bounce on it and you're hitting off a tight lie, you're going to hit some nifty little skull shots that you don't want. I've always believed that I can get the ball out of the bunker, and I don't need the high loft of the bounce. I don't need a big bounce on it. I can use a lower bounce, and I just open the thing up, and I feel like I want to slide the club under the ball a little bit more. I don't stick it in the sand so much and explode it out. And I think in today's world, you see more of the sliders where they slide the ball out a little bit. You don't see the too much chunk and run as you did way back when. So I like my sand wedge to be a little bit more utility for me, where I can use it in the fairways, use it off of a tight lie, and use it in the bunker. So that little piece that comes down, it's kind of a V shape. That's what it looks like when you're looking at the bounce. And the more V the shape is, the bigger the bounce.
Are you saying
hard to say?
Yeah, no. It's hard to explain without holding a club up.
Yeah, it's hard to explain with words. You have to see it.
Yeah. Are you saying that it's easier to get the ball to stop when you slide it under when you're in a bunker, or when you explode it out?
Well, to get the ball to stop, it has to do with speed. The more speed you can generate and hit and do it properly, the more spin you put on the ball, the more you stop the ball.
Backspin.
A lot of people like to hit it so that it releases a little bit. Not too many guys are trying to carry it to the hole and make it stop. That's the conditions have to be perfect for that in the sand. But you watch the guys today; they have that blade really open with the sand shot, and they just come from out to in on it and slide that baby underneath. Venturi used to, when he was alive and I got to play a little golf with him, I used to watch him, and that was his thing. He said, feel as if there's a tee under the ball and try to clip that tee. And I hit a lot of skull shots for a while until I got that feeling where I could slide the thing underneath.
You said perfect conditions when your ball's in the sand and under perfect conditions. For me, I'm a public course guy, right? I don't play the country club that has fresh sand brought in every 6 months. And so lots of times, especially after a harsh winter like we had, the sand, the bunkers are now hardly sand. They're almost mud or have turned into hard dirt. What are perfect conditions?
Well, then you have to get when you have it really hard pan, you got to be steeper on the shot. You got to literally make your own sand by hitting straight down into it and digging a little bit, that you just that would be a condition where you're stuck with that. Because if you try to pinch it off of a hard pan, you run the risk of the club bouncing because of the bounce on the club, and it bounces into the ball. The club head bounces into the ball, and you hit it in the middle of the ball and skull it. So in that case, you got to get steeper with it. The problem in muni places and places like that, it not only is sometimes there's way too much sand and it's really soft because it's not a silica sand. It's like a blow sand that you get in the desert, and that's really much more difficult to get it out and make it do what you want it to do. In that case, you're just trying to get it out and hoping for the best. But if you look at the tour, the bunkers are perfect, and they have kind of what they call a silica sand, and it's a tight sand in a way. You can slide the club under, but it's not arduous where you can't get it through. That real heavy sand is very difficult.
And when you look at the tour, you'll notice that even if they hit wayward shots, they don't lose balls. That's because there's people standing there watching where they land. I mean, it would be so much nicer and we'd play so much better if we didn't have to go searching for a ball that we saw land and, oh, okay, it's in the rough over there, and you can't find it. Anyway, that's my own issue.
Very seldom you see a lost ball on tour because there's so many people watching.
Right.
It happens occasionally, but very seldom. And plus, I think the average guy's errant shot is a little bit more errant than the pros. But you're right. That's a great thing that you never really lose a ball.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there a difference of the way bunkers are prepared or the type of sand that are in bunkers in the fairway versus the greenside bunkers?
No, they're generally, if they're using a silica sand, they're using it on all the bunkers. Typically, muni courses, they're using a heavier sand, so it stays in there a little bit more. But they don't use a different sand for fairways than they do greenside generally.
Okay, good. Need to know that. How many wedges do you carry in your bag?
A pitching wedge and sand wedge.
So do you carry 14 clubs?
Sure.
Then
I just load up.
Yeah, where do you load up?
I load up with the rescue clubs.
How many do you carry?
Yeah, let me see. I've got a driver, 3-wood, 5-wood, 3, 4, 5, rescue, then 6, 7, 8, 9 pitching wedge, sand wedge, and putter.
So I carry driver, 4-wood, then a 3 hybrid, 4 hybrid, and my irons are 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Pitch, gap, sand, lob.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more on the wedge side because to me it's, I'll hit my 4-wood. My driver I can hit. I average like 240 or between 240 and 250. But I can hit my 4-wood about 210 to 220, and then my 3 hybrid I hit 200, and then 185. So to me, that I feel like I've got all that covered, that distance, because I'm not going to go beyond that distance.
Like, each individual is different.
Sure.
I tried the gap wedge for a while, but again, it was confusing for me. First of all, unless you really play a lot and you're very skilled, the hardest part is distance control. If I've got a 91-yard shot, it's really hard for me to hit it 91 yards. I remember the funny story. The caddy said, Hogan said to the caddy, "How far is it?" He says, "It's 96 or 97. He says, "Which one is it?" Because that's how immaculate Hogan was about playing the game. I mean, he really could hit it within yards. But the average person, even the guys on tour, as you can see, they're either short or long most of the time.
So what's the difference in your distance between your pitching wedge and your sand wedge? On a full swing?
I had my set set up so that my sand wedge is a little on the strong side, so it's a little closer to my pitching wedge. So there's no need for the gap. My sand wedge is a 54 degree. A lot of them are 56s and so forth.
Right.
So I don't find it. I've never had a problem, and I played for years before there was gap wedges and 60-degree wedges, and I did just fine. But manufacturers put that seed in your head so you can buy more product. You got to have a gap wedge. You got to have a 60-degree. I mean, and I think Mickelson has a 64 degree or something like that. I'd be afraid I was going to hit myself in the head with the thing. So. I just don't see a need for it.
Well, I have like a 35-yard difference between my pitching wedge and my sand wedge. And to me, that's like, why would I want a 35-yard gap there when it could be so many different shots for me as I'm getting, for my approach shot? I can deal with a 25-yard distance between my long ones. But on those short shots,
but you maybe your pitching wedge is a little strong and your sand wedge is a little weak. But you should be able to take a pitching wedge out and hit it 50, 60, 70, 80. Now, you should be able to hit it all those distances. So, I mean, for heaven's sakes, they didn't have lob wedges or rescue. I mean, what am I trying to say? Gap wedges for or gap clubs for a long time, and people were able to, that's called shot making, and that gets back to these clubs. The great players like Hogan, he would hit every club in the bag during a practice round 25 times, and he'd hit them different trajectories, left to right, right to left, high and low, and he could stand out there and with his whole set of clubs and hit a green, say out about 150, 160 with every club in the bag, including the driver. So he had the ability to speed it up or slow it down and still make a legitimate swing and hit the ball flush. That's what's missing today. Everything is, I hit a 7-iron 170 and that's all I hit it. Well, you should be able to hit it 120 or 110. If a person would take the clubs that they have and practice with them and use them for different distances, you'd be surprised. They could literally eliminate some of the clubs in their bag and still be able to play without any problem.
You're making a basic assumption that we practice.
Well,
I can't tell you how many people complain about the fact that they want to be more consistent, but they never practice. Right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean,
oh man, if I was only more consistent. Well, what are you doing to work on that? Well, I go out and play golf.
When the best in the world, that's all they do for a living is play golf.
The key words there. The key words for a living. We all have to do other things.
That's why. I mean, you can't expect to play at the level that they play and not hit the ball, a number of balls that they hit. I mean, just not possible. It's just a comfort thing. It's a mental thing, really. When you hit a lot of balls, you're storing that in your subconscious mind, and the better you hit it, the better picture you have in your subconscious mind. Average guy, when he goes to play, he doesn't know what's going to happen that day. Probably within a 20-stroke period, where the touring pro, if he has a bad day, he's going to shoot 72 or 3 or 4. The average guy who maybe averages, let's just say 85, he doesn't know if it's going to be 120, 95, or maybe 80, and that's because the golf clubs aren't his friends. Because he hasn't hung out with them enough.
That's one of the things I talk about when someone asks, if I play for money. It's like, no, I'm competing against too many things that I can't bring money into the equation as well, because then I'll really freak out. And one of the things that I feel like I'm competing against is my golf clubs. I mean, there's the terrain, there's the weather, there's my head, and then a different club for every shot, different length. And, so I'm competing against those too.
Yeah. I mean, it's the game is, we manifest a lot of things like the thing when I have a young lady that I teach. I'm not going to use her name, but she constantly talks to me about the pressure, and that's something that we create because of doubt. There's no such thing as pressure. I mean, the golf ball doesn't know anything about pressure. The golf clubs don't know anything about pressure. The player is the one that is putting a value on the shot that doesn't need to be put on it. I got a 150-yard shot to a green. I've got a club I select, and if I make a decent swing, I should be able to put it on that green. But now, if I don't put it on that green, I may lose the tournament, or if I hit in that bunker or hit in the water. Well, these are all perceptions, and that's what, as a coach, that's what I'm always trying to explain to my players, that there is no such thing as pressure. When the flag goes up, it's no different. The golf course didn't change, the ball didn't change. The only thing that changes is your mindset. See, so in trying to be a good golfer, you have to work on that aspect too. And of course, the more that you practice and the more good shots that you see, the better chance you have of having a good image as you stand up to that ball, getting ready to strike it to a target.
I was playing yesterday with some guys, and one of them drove the green with a flag in the back and left himself about a 12-foot putt for eagle. He had more pressure on him than the rest of us did, because we were, putting for par or bogey, and he was putting. That all the pressure was on him, not to 3-putt.
Well, but see, there you go. It's a 12-foot putt,
right?
It hasn't changed. It's a 12-foot putt, but it's how we deal with it. If it's a 12-foot putt for a triple bogey, his chances are probably better to make it than if it's a 12-foot putt for an eagle. And yet, it's still a 12-foot putt. But again, it becomes, there's a value associated with it. And that's where we get into trouble in this game. If you could, but we have emotions, and that, it's easy for me to say that, but we have emotions, and we have pride, and we have ego, and we have all these things that we have to deal with. So, but there is no such thing as pressure. That's a manifestation of our mind, where we perceive things that are things. This is more valuable than that. I want to be able to tell everybody I eagle this hole. And so, this becomes more difficult than a 12-foot putt is. But who knows that button? If I knew how to press that button, we wouldn't be talking. I'd be in the Caribbean in a big ship or something.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the constant dilemma that we all face as players. But I mean, the reality of it, there is no such thing as pressure. It's just perception,
Well, I would think that a 12-foot putt for eagle for an amateur, the guy's in his head going, I got to make this putt. I have to make this. I have to make this putt. Well, he's doomed, right? But on the professional level, a 12-foot putt for eagle to win, it's a different. I mean, you're saying he's not going, I have to make this putt. I have to make this putt.
Well, I think professionals have a little better idea of what is the percentage of makes with a 12-foot putt on tour. And I think if you look at statistics, they don't make every one of them for sure. I would probably say that you've got maybe a 40% chance of making it. If you hit 10 balls on a 12-foot putt, you probably make 6 or 4. But it's a lot. The percentage is a lot higher, and that's another thing I tell my boys. Look, if you got a 20-footer, know that's a low number percentage on tour to make for sure. So relax a little bit. Put a good roll on it, and if you don't 3-putt it, if you roll it up there close, you sometimes make it. Bravo. But if you don't make it, and you get it up by the hole, good job. And tap in the putt, go to the next hole. You've got to be realistic about putts. I mean, I've had boys on my team that miss a 50-footer, and they'll lip it out, and they'll go crazy. I said, "What are you insane? Do you think you're going to make a 50-footer every time?" But
But when you get that close, I mean, like when it lips out from 50 feet, of course you're going to be like, oh. I wish that would have gone in.
But you should laugh. You should laugh. Holy mackerel, almost made that thing. See, it's the way you look at it. Jordan Spieth, I mean, he's like a wizard. I've never seen anybody make long putts as many times as he does, and when he misses, but you can't fall apart at the seams. It's something that's unrealistic. I mean, you just can't. And I think the better players handle it differently. They'll smile to themselves with a little wry smile. God, I almost made that, but they're not beating themselves up because they missed it. And I mean, you just have to be a lunatic to think that. But young people, especially young people, they think that everything is makeable. And when you miss, it's a disappointment. Well, not always, If you've got a 30 or 40 footer and you roll it up there a couple of feet from the hole, good job. And tap it in and go to the next hole. But again, I think that the unqualified player, the high handicap player, or the mid handicap player, or even the scratch player, we have a different view of things than the guy that's on the tour playing.
I think that when you talk about young people today and getting upset about missing 50-foot putts, you probably don't play golf video games, do you, Tony? Because they make those all the time.
No, I don't. I try to stay away from that stuff.
Me too.
Because I have a personality that's all I'd be doing.
I want to get into the long irons. You talked about the 7-iron and the different shots that you can have with a 7-iron. I know for me, one of the shots that I like to practice a lot, I'm about 145 with my 7-iron. And the fact that you said 180 just blows my mind. But so I'm about 145. But I also know that where I play, how often I play, where I play, there's a lot of trees. And so a shot that I have to have in my bag is to be able to punch it back out to the fairway and keep it under the branches. And so for me, I can do a 70-yard or 100-yard shot with my 7-iron, just letting it roll out, just, punching it out. So that is definitely one of the shots that I practice. So let's talk about long irons and other things you can do other than just hit, being on the driving range and hit ball after ball after ball. How far, how straight can I hit it? What other things can I do to take my game to the next level?
Well, when it comes to a club more than a 6-iron, when it comes to 5, 4, 3, 2, possibly 1, the first thing I say is take those clubs and throw them in the garbage and go get yourself some rescue clubs that have the same numbers, because it's a different world. Getting a 3-iron, 2-iron up in the air high enough to where when it comes down on the green it's going to stay is really difficult. It takes a lot of strength, and it's a much harder club to hit than if you get a 3 rescue or a 2 rescue or whatever. Those kinds of shots are. It's hard to have a lot of shots with a long iron, but you can do a little bit more with a rescue club. Because of the width of the bottom of the club, you can get it out of higher grass. You can't do that with a hoselled club like a 2-iron or 3-iron. There's no way. But that's why the pros in the past, when they got the ball in heavy rough, they had to use their 4-wood or 5-wood. But now that these rescue clubs are just unbelievable. But there's not much you can do with those kind of shots, those 200-yard shots or 180-yard shots, depending on how far you hit a ball. But for me, I hit my 3 rescue about 200 yards, sometimes 210, but that number 2 is what I'm selecting, because I always leave a little bit for error. But there's not much you can do with them. Hopefully you don't have too many of those shots per round, really, because it would make a long day.
Yes, it would. I'm just curious. Are you playing TaylorMade clubs?
No, actually, somebody turned me on to a club called XXIO, and it's a Japanese brand carried by Srixon, and they're expensive as hell. I will tell you that. But they're the best clubs I've played in a long, long time, especially the rescue clubs, the driver and the fairway, the 3-wood. 3-wood's always been a tough club for me off of a tight lie. And these clubs, I don't know what it is about them, but it gets the ball up in the air really easy. So I'm at that age now that anything I can do to make it easier, I'll go for it.
Right. No, the reason I was asking is because I think that TaylorMade was one of the first to bring out that club, and they called it a rescue club. I think that's a brand name, Rescue, but they're actually referred to as hybrids. Is that what a hybrid is?
Yeah, they're
yeah.
hybrid or utility. Like my XXIOs, this is U4, U5. Everybody has their way, but that I like rescue because that really describes it to me. If I had to pull out a 4-iron today, I would need to be rescued. Believe me.
Yeah, it's amazing how it cuts through long grass like butter on those clubs. It really makes a huge difference.
They put the CG on the golf club, the center of gravity on the golf club, on these new clubs. It just gets that ball up in the air really easy. And that's what you fight as you get older. You get slower and you get weaker. So the shots that you could get up in the air, like Nicklaus, they said that Nicklaus could hit a 1-iron the height of an 8-iron.
Wow!
What a huge advantage that is. But it takes tremendous strength to do that.
Right. So let's move on to the what used to be called fairway woods, and now they're called fairway drivers or fairway metals because nobody makes a wood anymore. What do you use them for? How many, you carry 2 of them, the advantage of having multiple ones, and what is the best thing we can do to, again, take our game to the next level with those clubs?
Well, the fairway woods are very important because they put you on the par 5s, they put you in a position to where you can hit a somewhat easy third shot, where it's in your sweet spot area where let's say your wedge or 9-iron. The fairway woods are important, and a lot of times it's best to use a fairway wood off the tee on a lot of holes. The distance difference isn't that wide. Now, I have, again, with a lot of my players, I say, look, this hole doesn't call for a drive. You don't need that distance. You can put the ball in a position where you have a fairly easy shot, and then you don't run the risk of, hitting it in the trees or whatever. But a lot of people are stuck on that driver. They pull that driver out no matter what the distance on the hole or no matter how narrow it is. So the fairway woods can be used off the fairway, but they can also be used off the tee. Now I wouldn't hit. I would be using my 3-wood most of the time when I was when I said, okay, I'm not going to use my driver on this hole. But there are times that I watch on the tour where the guys are using an iron off the tee. Of course, they hit an iron a lot farther than the average player. But the point is that in managing yourself around the golf course, you have to look at the hole and appraise, okay, where do I want to hit it? Where don't I want to hit it? Okay. And then what's the club I can use to get somewhere in that area? Because the woods are just to set the hole up. You're not going to drive the green. So 20 yards or whatever between the driver and 3-wood isn't that significant. But unfortunately, everything is stressed today about distance and not shot making. I think a lot of players, a lot of people that play the game would be better off not using their driver as much as they do and putting the ball in play. And then on the second shot on a par 5, for a lot of good players, they'd be much smarter to hit an iron up there within, that 60, 70-yard range and then throw that thing up on the green. Even Sam Snead, who is a long driver in his day, said, if I can't hit a high lofted club on the second shot on a par 5, I'll hit an iron into my wedge area. That's the way you play the game.
Sure.
But unfortunately, we're seduced by knocking it on a par 5 and 2, when you're young enough to do it. And the ball's coming in too low. If it hits the green, it's going to go to the back of the green. So you're going to be looking at a long putt. And now you got to try to 2-putt for that birdie. And if you 3-putt, it really demoralizes you. Where if you knocked it up there with a wedge, you got a good chance to hit it 10, 15 feet, good chance to make that putt. So it's just a different mindset. And these are the things that you have to do to keep the round going mentally. You don't want a lot of up and downs emotionally, and you put yourself in that position when you try to hit those. Hope I can get this on in two. That's where the ego gets involved, and that's what you got to eliminate.
I know that many times that if, say, on a par five especially, you can really use strategy to your advantage here because of that extra shot that you're given. So that if my drive on a par five leaves me 300 yards out, instead of trying to pull out my fairway metal, my 4-wood, and try to get it, listen, it's 300 yards out. I'm not going to be able to reach it, but then I'm going to leave myself a 60-yard shot, a 40-yard shot. I'm not as comfortable with those. I'd rather take my 9-iron and hit it twice and get close to the pin in 3 than try to get there in 2 and come up short and then have that awkward distance in the middle there.
Yeah, there's no question about it. Those shots where you say the 30 and 40-yard shots, those are really difficult shots even for the pros. They're not easy shots. Anytime you're having not take a full swing, it becomes a little bit more difficult. And those little tender wedges are tougher than heck.
Yeah.
So that, you just watch the good players play, and you're going to see that their strategy is a lot different than the average guy. The average guy swinging from his toes to hit as far as he can hit it on every club, which is, borderline on being a little nuts.
And the same thing that what you had talked about is using a fairway wood off the tee, fairway metal, fairway driver, off the tee on holes that either have narrow fairways or aren't as long. Again, I don't want to get too close and make it a difficult second shot. I want to be in the range of what I think is a good shot for me, like 110, 125 yard shot. I'm real confident with those, far more than I am with a 40. So I'll take that fairway wood off the tee.
Sure. And even if sometimes it's a long hole, but there's a lot of problems that the designer put on the hole. They put in a lot of big fairway bunkers that are hard to get out of. They put water, they put out of bounds. It's still sometimes, even though it's still a long hole and you're not going to be able to get on in 2, you've got to go ahead and swallow that bitter pill and put that thing in play, and then hit another shot and keep it in play, and then trust your wedge or putter. The worst thing that's going to happen, you're going to walk away with a bogey, but you're going to eliminate that big number by trying to stretch out because the hole is long without looking at the factors that are involved in the designer. He set that up for you to come on, hit that driver, buddy. That's what I want you to do. It's like a sucker pin.
Right.
You have to use your head when you play.
Right. You know what we call that, Tony?
What's that?
Golf smarter.
Yeah, golf smarter. That's exactly right. No, it's true. I mean, I think there was a hole in the Masters that Hogan always purposely hit to the right of the hole or right of the green, just on the fringe, and then chipped up and putted. And they always said, "Why do you do this?" Because this hole, if you hit the wrong side of the green, it's going to kick right into the water. So even the great Hogan, who really mastered hitting the ball, he had a strategy sometimes where he swallowed that bitter pill because he wanted to eliminate the big number. Mm-hmm. And you got to do that when you play the game. And it's like a chess game. It's not all about force. Sometimes you have to have a little finesse.
Yeah. Let's wrap it up with the driver, and I'll start with that one. I have I don't like to just walk onto a golf course and tee off. I really need, in my mind, my mental preparation. I need an hour to hit balls, to practice short game, a bunch of shots in the short game, very few shots with a driver, very few shots with my long, my fairway metal. But I'll spend a lot more time on short game stuff when I'm warming up. But when I do take out the driver, instead of taking full swings with it, I'll try to swing so easy that I only hit it 100 yards or 150, but try to, at a specific target, right at it. And that allows me to get a rhythm going and put the ball a short distance and feel more confident about taking a big swing after that. What would you advise on driver for, again, for your warm-up session or your practice session that's going to help your game keep the ball in the fairway? So critical with the driver.
Well, the old saying, I want to swing fast but not hard, with the driver. The driver is a wonderful club, and used properly, it's a great tool. But it can be your worst enemy if you're thinking about distance. Lee Trevino once was talking about playing with Nicklaus and how far Nicklaus hit it compared to everybody else. And he says, so when I played with Nicklaus, I would try to hit the ball 230 yards off the tee. And when I did that, I hit it about 270. He said, but when I tried to hit it 270, I hit it 230. Mm-hmm. And, that's just such great wisdom, because that's so much the truth. How many times have we got up on a par 5 and it's a long one, so we're going to give it that extra, and we throw it from the top and we get a little steep with it, and we pop it straight up in the air like a wedge, or we hit it way right or way left. There's a speed that you have to get used to with the driver, and a lot of it has to do with defocusing on the ball, defocusing on any thought of hitting, and swinging from point A to point B in a rhythm that you can keep your balance. And if you do that with the driver, you're going to keep the ball in play most of the time. But most people, you watch them, and they'll swing the driver a lot harder than they do any club in their bag. That's the problem with the driver, because, again, the emphasis is always on distance instead of direction and placement. To me, the driver is the placement. It sets the hole up for the next shot. It's not, I'm going to hit it into infinity, because no one does that. And then you see Rory McIlroy or some of these guys that hit it, pretty close to 400 yards. And, we can't wait to get to the tee to do that. Well, no. You're not in their category, and never will be. You have to play the game based on your game and not anybody else's. And I highly recommend for anyone listening there, find a speed that you can finish perfectly and hold your follow-through position where you're in balance. That's the speed you should swing the driver. And the better you get, and you can make it go a little faster, but still be unbalanced. But if you're falling all over the place, you're swinging too hard.
Phenomenal tip. That is such a fabulous piece of advice. Oh my God, I'm so happy with that. Thank you. That's great. Okay. I got to end here with a quick anecdote about my round yesterday. I was playing with these 3 guys that are actually around the same age as my younger son. And one of them, my son wrestled in high school for 4 years. And one of the guys that I was playing with wrestled against my son's team. And so he knew him. And so because I knew that the kid wrestled, it allowed me to, communicate with him in a better level. But what I noticed in the first 4 holes, he had absolutely no hip turn on his swing. And his address position was pretty much kind of slouchy shoulders, stand straight up. So he really wasn't in a ready position, and he wasn't doing anything. And he couldn't get the ball off the ground. He was rolling it. He was duffing it. He was missing it left and right. So I do not give swing advice on a golf course. I don't do that. And sometimes if I have an observation that might help on a mental part or a strategic part, I'll do that. But I'll stay away from swing mechanics, especially during a round. But I said to the guy, when I found out that he wrestled, I said, where do you get all your power when you wrestle? And he said, in your hips. And I went, uh-huh. And he kind of looked at me and I said, you don't turn your hips when you're hitting the golf ball. And he went, oh my, right? I said, what's your ready position when you're wrestling? And he immediately got into this very athletic position and, like looking right at me. And I'm going, uh-huh. Look at the way you're positioned when you start off the tee. And from that point on, he played the best golf of his life and broke 100 for the second or third time in his life. He was very, and even thanked me at the end of the round. He says that one tip about my hips made all the difference for me.
So you did something there that good teachers are able to do. You got him to relate to something that he does, so that he could. It wasn't foreign to him, and that's it. That was great. That was very astute on your part, because a lot of people teach, but they're more pontificating than teaching. And you made him relate to something that he does in a different sport, but was germane to the sport he was playing. So that was great. That was great stuff. I play with a lot of fellows that I teach, and when we're out there playing, they're trying to show me how good they're doing and so forth. And I understand all that, because when I've played with touring pros, I did the same darn thing. But I try to stay away from quick tips, other than to say, you might want to slow it down a little bit, or you might want to widen your stance a bit. But I don't get into too many swing tips, because if they overemphasize that, they're going to fall apart at the seams, and then they're going to be looking at you and say, "You ruined my day." They're not going to say it, but they're going to feel it. So
Sure.
you have to be careful with tips on the golf course. But that was real smart on your part.
Well, thank you. I was actually fishing for the compliment. I appreciate that.
No, that was because you got him to equate to something else, but something that he's comfortable doing. See, so that's great stuff.
Yeah, well, the first teacher that I ever had in golf, his first question, and this was huge for me, his first question was, "What sports did you play as a kid?" And from that point on, he just made me, he put it in those terms, of what sports that I played and how I can translate that into improving in my golf. And I always thought that was an incredibly valuable tool, because all I did was ask the kid a question. He fixed it himself. Once he realized what it meant in relation to his golf game, I didn't do a thing. I just made an observation to him.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'll just tell you a real quick story. One time I was inside the pro shop. I was watching the guy on the range, and he pulled up this beautiful set of Callaway clubs, beautiful bag. I mean, he had invested a lot in product. He gets up there, and I'm watching him, and a pretty strong-looking guy, and he was slicing everything. I mean, just sad. And I kept watching him, so I thought, I can't handle it anymore. So I went out and I said, "Let me ask you something. Have you ever played baseball?" He said, "Yeah, I was a really good baseball player." I says, "Just take out a club and imagine that you're hitting a low pitch. How would you hit a low pitch?" And he swung with a kind of a baseball action, released his hands, released the club head. And I said, "Yeah, that's pretty good." I said, "Now why don't you treat that golf ball like it's a low pitch? Just go ahead and take a good baseball cut at it." And of course, he hit a ball out there with a little bit of a draw. And he looked at me like God had spoken to him. So he hit it, little by little by little. You could see he was swinging the club in a motion that he was familiar with. And that's really, as a boy, when I first caddied, I caddied so I could make enough money to buy clothes for school. And I could play baseball pretty good as a young kid. Like a lot of young kids, we all played baseball. And those were my first thoughts to hit a golf ball, was just to hit the back of that ball with a kind of a baseball action. And I could clobber the thing right off the bat. I never sliced the ball when I started playing, because I equated it more to baseball. Now, if I had been given some formal lessons, I'm sure I would have sliced the heck out of the ball. So sometimes those are the best lessons, when you can open up a guy's or a gal's mind to something that they've done in their past when it comes to hitting a golf ball, especially women. Gosh, I teach a lot of women, and I talk to them. Have you ever played baseball? Have you ever played tennis? And then we try to use a similar stroke, and it works like magic.
Well, Tony, I don't want to equate you with God, but there's something godlike. No, wait. Let me finish my sentence, my friend. There is something godlike about great teachers, and you are a great teacher. And I really appreciate you spending so much time with me every time I call. Thank you.
Well, listen, I love your show, and I know the listeners to your podcast love your show, and to be a small part of it is really an honor for me. Believe me.